All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? So the first topic is around AWS backfill and those particular failure conditions. Nicola, do you want to talk a little bit about this? Because you're the one who kind of found these conditions and brought up the issue.
Okay, so the issue is when we have a backfilling and unfound object is found during backfilling, we enter backfill unfound state for this PG, and when we are restarting an primary OSD for this PG set, then strange things may happen, and there was a crash in one case, which was fixed by just removing an assertion, and but still there is yet another case when the crash is possible. But another issue with this is that actually right now when you restart the primary OSD, when you have this unfound state, and another OSD becomes primary, temporary primary, and if this unfound, and we are discussing here Rajura coded pool and PG in this pool, and so if another OSD becomes primary that does not have this object, and it is running this. It's after appearing, it starts this backfilling process again, but it does not find this object in its listing, so it thinks everything is okay, and then the PG enters a clean state. So it was one of the issues is how to make this error persistent.
It seems like there are sort of two roads to go down, if I'm understanding this correctly. Like, I mean, clearly master shouldn't crash, right? But you could imagine continuing with the old behavior, where if the OSD restarts, we sort of forget that the object was unreadable and had an EIO. And then if we try to read it again or we scrub, then it appears as unfound again.
Yes, if you scrub, you will find so actually it's yes, something like can be found by scrub. So I don't know what we want actually to fix this, how we want to fix. Probably Sam can provide some more details.
Yeah. Certainly for the older versions, I think the right answer is to shore up the existing behavior. Don't crash, but don't try to fix it either, per se. Scrub will catch it later, and that's good enough. Well, sort of. For master, though, we now have the capacity to write down things that are in the missing step. So plausibly, we could add a message to the backfill process that forcibly adds things to the missing set on replicas. So when we do a backfill read, if we get back, if we learn during that process for an erasure coded pool that some replica doesn't have a copy or the primary doesn't for a replicated pool, we can add that to the missing set and wait for that to be done before letting last backfill advance, which would give us the state required to ensure we don't forget it later. That would also give us the right primitive, I think, for dealing with this in Scrub as well. When we find one of these objects isn't where it should be or is unreadable, we can add it to the missing something relevant OSD and continue on that way. That'll give us sort of a baseline piece of state to deal with these things in general.
I guess one sort of high-level question I have is it the right thing if we get one IO error trying to read an object, is it the right thing to like mark down that it's unreadable and never try to read it again?
Not necessarily, but
that doesn't mean we shouldn't write it down.
yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying. Yeah. It's something to resolve, I would argue. So until it's resolved, it probably ought to get written down somewhere.
Yeah. It's not just backfill, right? It's if there's
it's essentially the same problem as Scrub, yeah.
Yeah, or I mean, this can happen during Scrub, it could happen during backfill, it could happen if we just read an object in an EIO.
Correct. Yeah.
And it could happen during normal recovery. So there are like at least 4 different probably variations on those depending on whether it's a replica or primary and so on.
So we'd want something looking a bit like a common pathway there, but
yeah. Like mark unfound or whatever it is.
Yeah, we have a little bit of a common pathway there for just handling the EIOs in general, but it's not persisted right now, so I think we can probably add that persistence there.
Existing.
Well, the message handling sequence would be an entirely new thing. That's kind of what I mean.
Yes.
Would this be a flag in the object info T?
No. I think
No,
it goes into
the missing set.
Missing set.
I maybe missed the initial part of this discussion. It's a few minutes late, but so Mikola, from what I'm understanding from your latest test results, is that with the patch that you applied on Nautilus, the same test that is failing in master is not failing in Nautilus. So everything seems just fine with Nautilus, even with file store, right?
Yes, if we are talking about crash on, yes, it does not crash. So I suppose the crash we are observing on master is due to refactoring we have had after post Nautilus. From this point of view, I'm still interested to know if we can merge this we have on Nautilus. It improves the situation that we do not lose this state when a non-primary is restarted. Anyway, we still lost it when the primary OSD is restarted, so it's kind of partial fix. But yes, so just if it was not clear from the context, we actually, one of the issue was that the state, this information about unfound state was lost, and another that there were some crashes on the master, on post-Nautilus branches. And I think they were related to refactoring of the post-Nautilus.
So yeah, I think in general, Sam, I'd like to hear your opinion too. The idea of maintaining backfills in flight for anything but the primary, which Mikola is essentially manually backporting, and which you had in your refactor, seems right to me. And that's probably why that's fixing the problem in Nautilus with the test that Mikola has. And if that is valid, then even the other patch, which he was talking about, the crash in master, that is a follow-up of that, right? Because you're expecting that backfills in flight and the recovering set are not the same, except the only change is the primary can have something which is preventing it from being the same. So those two changes are currently, with this particular patch that he's talking about, are same in master and Nautilus. But there seems to be something extra or like something missing in master, because of which we see that other crash that he saw while running that test.
Yeah. Actually, I don't know yet, for example, what the actual cause of that crash. It looks like probably
Well,
maybe
there's
some
a basic
race.
assumption that
Yeah.
everything in backfills and flight isn't recovering. So on Nautilus, I suppose it happens not to cause a crash when that gets violated, but that's almost a surprise, really. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to see, and even maybe worth looking at why master is crashing versus Nautilus is not crashing, because this test seems pretty controlled. Like there's just one PG, and we should probably look at why the same crash does. Yeah, just comparing. And yeah, it's worth mentioning that this is only happening in file store. I have no idea why, because it's not happening on bootstore at all.
One of my, I have not yet confirmed this, but my current assumption that the file store is faster when restarting, and it happens only when so OSD is stopped, peering happens, and it enters backfilling state, and when it's still in backfilling state, this is OSD that was stopped. It started again, and a new peering event happens, and this is where it may crash. And when it started after peering, after backfilling is already completed, then it will not crash. But I still need to retest and confirm that this assumption is correct.
Yeah, sure. What I'm just trying to say is that maybe compare that same test that you're running in file, that same test that is passing on Nautilus, and compare the same test on master, and see what the difference in code path is. Why is master crashing? That could give us a rough idea about whether there was something missing or there's some invariant that's being broken somewhere.
Yeah, okay. In my to-do, I will investigate this and will provide more details about this crash and why it actually happens on file store.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks.
The other aspect of this that I think we wanted to discuss was how we can get better coverage for these kinds of cases. If this kind of thing wasn't being turned up by the existing error injection tests.
If we get better implementations of these error cases, we could do something like have the error injection suites deliberately keep a set of objects with at least one broken copy, and poke at the relevant OSDs to keep that count where it should be. The OSDs would then have a really high chance of encountering one of these broken objects and being forced to deal with it in Ceph test rados.
But no EIO, you won't be able to create that.
Why not?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the error injection that I'm familiar with right now is transient. Like it's an ASOC command that has some state, and if you restart, it'll forget and whatever. Like it seems like if we have a persistent thing where we say this object on this OSD should get EIO.
Yeah.
And then we sort of randomly poke at objects that way, then we'll be much more likely to hit them when we start moving data around.
The slightly tougher part is we have to make sure we don't poison too many of them. That's
exactly.
The tough bit.
Yeah,
but I think
it wouldn't
you
be
can just
too hard.
Yeah, I think at a basic level, as long as only one copy is damaged, or rather, at least however many copies are still alive, we're fine.
Right.
So if we add that as like a stock command or something, and then controlled it in Tudology or in a test script, you'd be sure that we weren't corrupting too many copies.
Yeah, and we'd have to teach the object store how to persist that information that it's supposed to return EIO for this object. Yeah. But yeah, you can create 1,000 objects, and for like 50% of them, just pick one replica and poison it, and then go to town.
There should be some kind of metadata stream where we can see when these things are repaired. So as long as the test is consuming that stream, it can tell when things get fixed and rebreak them as needed. I mean, it can parse the cluster log, and we can make sure that we put notifications for fixed events in there. That should exist anyway, I think. It's a good notification.
Do a scrub at the end. Sure, everything's good. Create a Trello card for persistent. What would it be? Persistent EIO.
Will be the only storage system that guarantees a failed object.
Okay. Added a card to Trello.
Is there anything else we want to discuss with this one? All right, sounds like not. So let's go on to the next topic with RHW, a design discussion for encryption policy.
Cool, yeah. So this is a feature that we've been planning. Marcus has done some design work around it. And we've got interest from some developers at Flipkart that want to help out. So we wanted to get Marcus and them in on a call. Marcus, how do you want to do this? Do you have anything to present, or should we create an Etherpad for this stuff?
You're still muted, Marcus.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
Let's see. I certainly can talk about it for a bit. I've got an outline and some stuff if that's useful, or I'm not quite sure how to incorporate an Etherpad into this.
Let's see. Just create a pad and then take notes while you talk through it.
Yeah, no, I haven't messed around much with Etherpad. I'm sorry. So, but let's see. What I can do is I can share my screen somehow. Let's try that. Come on. Oh crap. Apparently this has changed a bit. Okay. Can you see something?
Yeah.
Okay, so crap, that's not the right thing, but Okay, so anyway, that was kind of an outline of what I wanted to talk about. So there's about 4 main kinds of AWS Rados or RGW S3 encryption. First kind of encryption is client-side encryption, and that's where all of the encryption, decryption, and key management happens on the client side. That's a feature of the AWS SDK, and that doesn't have any implications whatsoever for the server. Second kind of encryption is called SSE-C, and that's where the client provides the key. So there's logic on the server side to handle actually decrypting and encrypting the object, but the key is provided by the client. And that means the client's responsible for managing that key and has access to that key. The third kind of encryption that's in S3 is SSE KMS, and in that scheme, there's a KMS that's shared between the client and the server, and the client is responsible for creating the keys in the KMS, and then the server handles fetching the key and using it to encrypt objects. And then the final kind of encryption is SSE S3, and that's where it works very much like SSE KMS, except the server is also responsible for creating and deleting the keys, and so it's completely transparent to the client. The client doesn't really see much of anything. So at this point, Ceph doesn't have to do anything to implement client-side encryption. Ceph does handle both the SSE-C cases and the SSE KMS cases, and so the one case that's left that we don't handle today is SSE S3. At this point, I thought it would be reasonable to talk a little bit about Vault, because that's kind of the prototypical KMS, and there's a couple of myths about it that are worth addressing. First thing is, when you set up Vault, the very first thing you run across is something called a root token, and it's not obvious immediately from the way that Vault's presented that basically you don't want to use root tokens for anything except maybe the initial setup. The right way to think about tokens with Vault is that tokens are basically like Kerberos tickets. They have a short lifetime, and you want to get a new one every so often. There's at least 20 different ways in Vault to get tokens, and that would mean a lot of code if you were going to try to support all of those directly. And so the right way to, I think, to manage Vault tokens is you run an instance of Vault Agent, and you make it responsible for renewing tokens or getting a new token as necessary. All of the code's in Vault Agent, and it's easy to use it transparently. So there's no reason inside of Ceph to manage Vault tokens, except for in terms of using the Vault Agent. Last thing that Vault provides, which is very useful for Ceph, is it provides a secret store called Transit. And the cool thing about Transit is if you use it correctly, you can manage and use keys that exist only inside of Vault. They don't ever have to come outside of the Vault. And the way that works is that when you're encrypting a Ceph object, you create a key, and then you ship it off to Vault Agent, and you ask it to encrypt it under a key that's stored inside of Vault. And what you get back is an encrypted string that you can store with the object. And that means at that point you have an encrypted object and you have an encrypted key. And in order to decrypt that object, you have to go back and present the encrypted key to Vault, ask it to decrypt that, and then you can use that to decrypt the actual object. Cool thing about that is that makes key rotation very simple, because key rotation basically consists of inside a vault, you can ask it to take one of these transit secrets and create a new key version. And at that point, whenever you're creating a new object, you're going to get it encrypted under the new key. And Vault keeps the old key around under a different key version number. And that means you can have a mix of old objects and new objects and be able to get access to all of them. In order to retire the old key, what you have to do is you have to go through, find all the objects that have the old key version number and rewrap those keys under the new key version number, and then you can retire the old key. You can be as lazy as you want about that. I think in the context of Ceph, that might actually be a choice about how you would like to do that. So let's see, what do I have next here? So because Ceph has all of the code for SSE KMS, there's really not a whole lot of new stuff that needs to happen. The basic stuff that needs to happen is there needs to be a notion of having bucket keys, which basically, when you're SSE KMS, you just name the key. And so you can have keys, a bunch of keys, and they're pretty much orthogonal to buckets and objects. But with SSE S3, you need to have a distinct notion of what your key is. And if you want to make key rotation work gracefully, you probably want to have one key per bucket. So in terms of the Ceph implementation, there's a couple of things that has to happen. It's most of the complexity is going to be taking the existing Ceph code and teaching it that you've got these two different notions of talking to the KMS. And so that means in the configuration, you're going to want a parallel set of configuration options to name the SSE S3 stuff that's separate from the SSE KMS stuff. The starting reason for doing that is because you want the SSE S3 encryption to be using a different key space inside of your KMS than your SSE KMS stuff, because you really don't want your customers to be interacting and screwing up the keys that Ceph is trying to manage. An interesting possibility that seems to me reasonable to do is providing the opportunity to have a completely different backend for your KMS between SSE S3 and SSE KMS. And I can imagine, for instance, an installation choosing to use KMIP for SSE S3 and using Vault for SSE KMS. Obviously, if Ceph is expected to manage keys, it's going to need to support creating keys and deleting keys when a bucket's removed. Key rotation is something where you probably want to have configuration options to control when and how often you rotate keys. And you might like manual control options to be able to administer that as well. And then the final bit of code that needs to be provided is that in the S3 protocol, there is a way to set policy that requires that you have encryption turned on. And there's some missing bits of code there that we'll need to provide in order to make that possible. That is pretty much most of what I have. I can talk a little bit about the places in the code where I think things need to happen. I don't know if that's of particular interest to people here or not.
Well, can I just ask a quick high-level question about the put bucket encryption policy? That's like a per bucket policy that the client or admin can set. What
Yes.
exactly does that let you do? Does it mean that no encryption happens unless the bucket has a policy?
No. Encryption is the thing that actually controls whether the encryption happens or not is the attributes that are set on the object at the time that you do put object. But what you can do with policy is you can require that those encryption parameters actually be there. I think you can actually you can set or require that particular values be provided for the encryption also. So that means you can create a bucket that has to have everything encrypted inside of it.
So more about what's the difference between the policy material that goes in bucket policy versus the material that goes in that's stored in the document that you upload with put bucket encryption. Should you choose to do that?
I think it's different attributes in the same policy document. So we've got the basic policy framework, but we don't have the bits that describe the attributes that are required for that.
My understanding of the bucket policy part is that we do have everything that we need to require a specific header with the request, and I thought that's all that we needed for requiring encryption.
There is one piece I found. No, that's not it. That was not it either. It's not crap. I know I've got this somewhere.
So the bucket policy can require clients to request encryption of all of the objects, but is the put bucket encryption policy, does that let you tell the server to encrypt things even if the client doesn't request it?
Yes, I believe that's the case, and I believe it effectively opts them into SSES3 for that bucket.
Yeah. I'll have to
I think I disagree with that. If you look at the AWS S3 API, if put bucket policy is enforced, then put bucket encryption policy is enforced, then for every request, put request which comes with a header which says that if you want server-side encryption, only then it encrypts with the SSE/S3 created key. However, if that header is missing, then it stores that object in an unencrypted, without encrypting that object. But if you want all the objects in that bucket to be encrypted all the time, then you have to set another policy on the bucket, which says that deny unencrypted uploads and deny I think some header, specific header. There are two such things which have to be specified. So these two policies have to be then enforced. Only then all the objects which come, if the header of server-side encryption is missing, then the server throws an error that you better mention the header.
Okay, so the client still has to request encryption with SSE/S3
headers. Yeah, but without the key. But without
policy,
the key.
Right, the policy just tells RGW how to find the right key to do the encryption.
Correct.
Okay.
So I think Prasad has mentioned. Thanks, Prasad. He's mentioned the two policies which are documented in AWS S3: deny unencrypted object uploads and deny incorrect encryption header.
Yeah. So these are the notes that I had. Apparently, there's an encryption parameter that you can specify that will get you some information about how the encryption is working. And there's apparently a put bucket encryption that controls part of this logic. So those are the pieces that found that we were missing. So this may actually be a different string, or that's not the same as the policy document.
Right, put bucket encryption as a separate XML document.
Right. Yeah. And that probably means there will need to be some changes, stuff that's somewhere in the bucket data that's on the server.
Yeah, most of our policy is just X adders on the bucket metadata.
Right. Yeah. So this
So that
probably
seems
just
like a
be
good
another one of
place.
those. Yeah.
So I think in terms of implementation, a piece of kind of low-hanging fruit would just be support for XML encode and decode for that structure.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, that looks pretty standalone.
So Priya, Prasad, about the vault parts specifically, is there anything that Marcus talked about that isn't compatible with the way that you're using it?
No, actually, I think Marcus mentioned something about KMIP, when to use KMIP versus when to use Vault. So I was a little confused. What I was thinking from SSCS3 point of view is that I don't think Ceph will ever have its own KMS kind of thing. So it will always talk to some vault, be it a KMIP, Barbican, or the HashiCorp vault with which it is already integrated, 3 of them. So at the backend, we have any of these 3 KMS, and but to the client, we say that yes, we support SSCS3, and depending upon what type of KMS server is there at the backend, it would have all those policies and everything, and do the key management with that type of KMS. So that was my understanding. So for example, in Flipkart, we have a variant of HashiCorp, and that is what we would want to use for all our key management. And so we want our RGWs to talk to that the HashiCorp vault for key generation, key rotation, key wrapping, whatever it be it.
Okay. If you're specifying the KMS, if you're using Vault, for instance, one of the parameters for Vault is, which one is it? It's the Vault prefix. And that basically names which part of the Vault namespace you're using. For SSE S3, that needs to be a different string than what you're using for KMS, because you don't want users to be interacting with the secrets that Ceph is managing.
Sure, got it. Okay, so the prefix.
And so that means at the very least, you need to have a way to vary that thing. It seems to me the more general case would be to allow the possibility of using a different KMS backend for SSE S3 versus for SSE KMS.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, you're saying that we should not have our customers talking to the same KMS server with which the
no, it's okay. No, that's not quite right. They shouldn't be interacting with the same set of keys.
Correct. That is agreed. That is agreed. So the customer has no clue of the key IDs or the namespace. I think the prefix. I think which you said should have
right
no
for
clue
SSE S3. That's
correct.
exactly correct.
That's true. So it's a complete different sort of a namespace altogether. It's multi-tenant. Right. One of them would be this Ceph, and maybe other customers could use. Okay, that's okay.
Yeah. So this is when I was going through the configuration options. This is the what I've got on the screen here is more or less what I was finding. Can you read that text?
Yeah, I can read this text. So what
and
do you want?
The set of options at the bottom is more or less the set I thought would be necessary for starting with an implementation that just supports Vault for the begin to start with.
Sure.
I'm not in love with these names.
Okay.
I was looking at our existing naming conventions for all of these options, and S3-SSE just doesn't really do it for me, but I'm not quite sure how to make it all coherent and rational.
Doesn't look that horrible to me.
Yeah, so I would love a different, better naming scheme than this.
Sure, we'll think about it and maybe change it.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, we can think about the naming convention and try to change it.
Yes.
If you can put
Yes.
this in the Etherpad, that will be great. So in some sense, if I understand correctly, we will have two sets of APIs or interface. One would be which would do all the key management. So maybe we would need some different type of Rados Gateway admin key management subcommands, which would be required to set up the keys. If you want to create a pool of keys, or do you want to create a separate key for every bucket? If you want to do key rotations.
I don't think there's any necessity to do that. I think that from the Redis GW admin standpoint, I think the only thing that's probably really necessary is some commands to interact with the way key rotation works.
Key rotation, and if in future we want key wrapping, the DEK wrapping.
Well, I think we want the key wrapping from the start.
Oh, you want it from the start? Okay.
I mean, that's what the transit coding for SSE KMS does today. I think we want to. That's probably the only form of encryption that we want to carry forward. So I'm thinking this is going to look like just the Vault transit encoding.
Okay. So like
I think the ongoing issue. Sorry, I just wanted to mention. Well, I think if at all possible, I'd like to see us not introduce dependencies in Rados GW admin, or at the least, if there is anything that needs to be there, make sure it's accessible with the admin ops API.
My thinking is that if you just want to use bucket encryption, you just turn it on and you don't interact with the Rados admin command at all. When you turn it on, the next time Ceph stores an object, it goes out and sees that the key exists in Vault, and if it doesn't, it creates a bucket key automatically. And when you delete the bucket, it would just go out and always try to delete the key that should belong to that bucket. There is one other thing that I should mention about the naming of the key that you put in Vault. You don't want to name that after the bucket name because the bucket name could change if you rename the bucket. The keys should be named based on the bucket's UUID, which does, or some part of the bucket name part that cannot change.
Okay. The key name, I'm noting it down in the notepad. So the key name should be based on the bucket UUID. That's a good point. However, we would need some sort of a Rados gateway command for the key rotation and wrapping, right? Or do you think you want to do it automatically? It will be a configuration parameter in the config file.
At the very least, there should be a Rados admin command that you can ask it to force key rotation. That seems like a good basic starting point. I think it would probably be desirable to have the ability to say rotate keys once a month or something like that. There's probably a distinction. I'm sorry?
Does that mean that we have to keep an index of all encrypted objects in order to loop through and rotate the keys?
There's a couple of ways to handle this. When you encrypt an object, you would be storing an attribute that contains It basically contains the encrypted key. It also contains the key version number, and the key version numbers could be easily parsed out of that. The very simplest way to do the key rotation is just always, encrypt new objects and don't bother to go back and try to rewrap old keys. But if you want to rewrap old keys, you need to iterate through. I think probably the simplest way to do that is just iterate through all the objects in a bucket and just get the attributes one by one and rewrap the attributes.
Okay. And I guess you'd only need
Yeah,
to
it's certainly where I'd start.
buckets that have an encryption policy on them.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could go out and try to fetch the bucket key, and if it doesn't exist, then you don't need to rewrap anything.
This process might be outboardable too with the bucket inventory also at some point in future.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, the rewrapping keys is going to be a distinctly more expensive operation than just creating a new key version number. And so it's probably useful to make a distinction between those two different events.
So Marcus, do we plan to store the KEKs in some different, in somewhere, or we will have to go through all the buckets which have the policy enforced and fetch the KEK and then to issue a key rotation?
Like I said, the key rotation is really two parts. To just create a new key, the only thing you have to go talk to is Vault. You don't have to do anything else. To rewrap all the keys in a bucket, you have to crawl through the bucket and find all the objects encrypted with that.
No, I was not talking about that. If we have to do automatic key KEK rotation, the master key rotation. In that case, are we going to keep the master key somewhere else?
There's no reason to keep that key anywhere except inside Vault.
No, not the key. The key name actually. The KEK name,
key name.
ID.
If you derive the key name off the bucket name, you don't need to store that anywhere.
Okay. No, I mean, okay. So I think if we have to do automatic key rotation, the KEK key rotation, we will be going through all the, say there's an automatic key rotation after every 60 days. Then we go to all the buckets which have the policy encryption enforced, and then create the, based on the UUID, create the KEK name and call the Vault to rotate those keys, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah, except that Vault actually provides an operation to do all of that. So you basically just tell Vault do the key rotation, and it creates a new key for you.
Correct. Yeah.
So, Marcus, do you think an implementation where we bring support for the 3 APIs, which allows clients to opt in for encryption, the put, get, and delete bucket encryption APIs, along with, a support for SSE S3, which would, like say use the bucket marker, which is unique as the key ID, and have an option to talk to any vault of choice. The vault of choice would be something very modular, and we could have multiple implementations added later, but we could start with one of the implementations, say something like a HashiCorp vault, and which will have some of the safeguards that you mentioned, like if a bucket and can be a mixed bucket wherein it could host objects which are unencrypted, which are encrypted using SSE S3. Then it should not share the key namespace with the ones that are specified by the customers themselves. And have just one such implementation on top of the existing KMS infra that's already there in the master branch. Does that sound like
that's a fair summary? Yes.
Okay. Sure. That's something that we'd like to kind of have, and yeah, we are kind of working on the implementation. I'm not sure if there already exists an implementation somewhere in a private branch or a repo that we could look up, or is this something that has to be created afresh?
I've got the bare beginnings, but not very much code. I don't think this doesn't look to me like it's going to be a very complicated project, so I don't think it's going to be that hard to do.
Okay. So essentially, the development would be, a layer on top of KMS, which would bring the SSE S3 functionality, along with implementation of the 3 APIs, which will allow bucket policy to be appended.
Yeah, no, it should be sharing most of its code with the KMS stuff. I think the most challenging part is going to be figuring out how to reorganize the KMS logic enough to basically make it configurable between these, sharing the same code with both the SSE S3 case and the SSE KMS case. So
sorry, I didn't get the last part.
There's a bunch of places in the KMS code where it's looking for like RGW crypt vault adder and RGW crypt vault prefix directly. And that's going to need to be configurable so that it can either look for RGW crypt vault prefix or RGW S3 SSE vault prefix. So it's, in a sense, it's going to be an intrusive change, but it shouldn't be, and it will have a lot of lines of diffs, but it shouldn't be a very complicated difference.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we are not yet intimately familiar with those parts of code, but that's what we'd like to change. I think on an ongoing basis, we'll probably interact with you over email or through patches, and
okay,
we'll try to ship it out.
We can also make a standing agenda item for it in the refactoring meeting. To hopefully make sure that we have opportunities to talk.
Yeah, makes sense. We'd like to participate until we are able to have this feature in.
Great.
Priya, anything else from your side?
I think there's one question, Marcus, which I had was, I think your the KMS logic, which is which interacts with the 3 different types of KMSs, that is KMap and Vault and everything, is there in the master branch. Do you have any plans to backport it to Nautilus?
Well, I think a lot of that's in Barbican. The only part that's probably, the 2 things that might not be in Nautilus today, the KMIP stuff might not be there, and the transit stuff might not be there. I think there were plans to backport both of those, but I'm not quite sure where that's at.
Yeah, Marcus, I believe that you did stage the backport, but we made the call not to take it to Nautilus.
Okay, well, that's what happened to that then.
So in a nutshell, you'll not be backporting it, right, to Nautilus?
Yeah, looks like I think the last call for backports is already out. I saw the email like a few hours ago. So.
If you guys could really use it on Nautilus, then we could revisit that and discuss it. I'll try to find the backport PR.
That would be great, actually.
Yeah, Casey. Yeah, we'd like to see the backport PR.
We're trying to close out the final Nautilus release pretty soon. I'm not sure if it makes sense to continue backports there, if this is a larger feature.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, we maintain a downstream backport, Red Hat of these features, and the baseline macros is other staged backport. So we're in extremis, that might be the way where it would handle it, is to do a build that has backport for their use.
So I linked the PR that Marcus prepared against the Nautilus branch, so all of the code is there, could potentially be tested. But yeah, I considered it a feature backport, and so I didn't think it was reasonable to get it in for Nautilus.
Yeah, that makes sense. And of course, if folks want to open up backport branches, that's fine. But I think at this stage in the Nautilus lifecycle upstream, it doesn't make sense to include it in a release. So, anything else you want to talk about on this topic?
I'm good.
So
All right,
maybe
let's
a good
move.
place to start work is just the put bucket encryption APIs themselves. And then maybe next week in the refactoring call, we can go over the next steps.
Okay.
Yeah, that
Great.
sounds fine to
Thanks,
me.
guys.
Probably what I will go probably do next. The interesting piece to me, I guess, is the Vault, how to interact with Vault to create and delete keys. So it's probably the next piece I'll tackle.
Sure, Marcus.
All right. Thanks, Marcus.
All right, thanks, folks. So I think we can move on to the next topics then, which are more related to the manager. First one is about sub-interpreters and continuing to occasionally run into these new bugs, and this time due to dependencies of dependencies, or maybe dependencies of dependencies of dependencies, in any case, far down the chain, from what we can control directly. So I think we need to figure out what we wanted to do to mitigate that, maybe in the short term and in the long term.
Yep. So I do not really have a good answer, man.
Yeah, John had a nice summary of options.
Yeah, we talked about some of these in the previous CDM as well, like maybe a shorter term, like keeping things within the same host with multiple processes. Ernesto had a couple suggestions on the mailing list as well that might be perhaps short-term workarounds. Importing them in the main manager.
I mean, I'm hesitant to go down the process route because it will make the inter-module communication so much more expensive.
There's not that much of that, though. I mean, and it's not really a performance-sensitive piece that much, is it? Like the intermodule communication, I can think of is like
modules like the dashboard and Prometheus are like extensively using the state that the C++ manager code is gaining, and all the perf counters and cluster state and so on. I think those would, although this is like after making a REST call, so maybe an extra hop isn't such a big deal, but I'm also just worried that going down that road is like a significant investment in infrastructure.
Hmm.
I'm trying to think of what if there are. Well, look, it seems like there's maybe a midterm, like a short to midterm fix, and then there's the long-term strategy. And there was one reference at the end of this thread, I think, of there's some new multi-subinterpreter, isolated subinterpreters that's experimental, but maybe will develop further. That's something we could aim for in the longer term.
Possibly, if those caveats are resolved, then it's usable for everything. I think that I'm not sure how it's going to develop, I guess. But we could try to focus on a short-term solution that works for, say, the next year or two, and see where that goes.
That's kind of what I'm thinking. Because if we don't need to, if we just need a short to medium term solution, then I wonder if the simplest would be just combining everything back under a single interpreter again.
Yep.
As that is efficient, it's relatively simple. I think the only real challenge is we have to make sure we only have one user of CherryPy. But that doesn't seem like it would be that hard to fix.
CherryPy in itself also already supports the VSTI interface to hook in multiple different applications. That's my information.
Yeah.
So we should be able to build some kind of a common web server module.
Yeah. What do you think, Ernesto?
Yeah, I don't know, because I think one of the reasons for these isolated sub-interpreters is about performance. And I'm not sure if that might, running everything from a single interpreter could have involve some bottlenecks in terms of performance.
There's still a global lock, isn't there, for all the Python state?
Yeah, that's true.
So I think it shouldn't affect performance really at all, I think. If anything, it might make it slightly faster, but
so the idea then would be to run a single global interpreter and then run a threading, Python threading for every single module, right? In the Python side.
Yeah, I think so.
I think the threading is should not change, right? It's just that we are disabling subinterpreter, so which means that every module shares its global state.
Yeah. I guess CherryPy is the only offender that we're aware of. Are there others that might be problematic? I guess we won't really know until we try.
So the unit tests already load all modules or import all modules without subinterpreters, so it works. Though they're not really creating a web service. So
yeah,
it's only very partial.
Yeah, it seems like the only way to find out if it works is to actually do it. And
yeah.
What are you gonna ask? I
was gonna ask if there's an immediate bug. Like, what is the latest symptom of this that we have? Is there we have to fix immediately, or is this something we can switch for Quincy? Are we being defensive here?
I think the latest Ubuntu is broken, right?
Like NumPy or something?
Yeah, so if we get a new NumPy version in the distributions, then we will probably end up with a blocker. Maybe. So I think we can wait till it's becoming critical. I don't think that we will have a lot of time left.
might be worth trying it out and just seeing if everything breaks horribly. Because if it does, then it might be longer to fix.
Right. Find that out sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's not too hard to just test it out just by launching all the modules under one sub-interpreter even instead of the separate ones. Structure's already there. Yeah. Okay.
So one other question about this: the offending module is this NumPy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it seems it's been used by this prediction local, only the local one. Okay, and also you mentioned, Sebastian, the Kubernetes client. Is that run from the Kubernetes events or?
Yeah. So it's a transitive dependency of Kubernetes client. And I don't think that we can avoid it. We could try mocking the NumPy, the WebSocket library within the Kubernetes client, but
So it's getting pretty fragile at that point.
yes. Yes. So we would mock internal libraries that's used within Kubernetes client, and I don't like it.
Yeah, I was asking because I was checking the Dix prediction module, and it seems like it was just a first impression, but the MP module NumPy is only used in the pre-processing stage, so maybe it's not needed in the running module. It's only during some stage or something. So maybe it can be imported in that function, and we avoid importing that as a global stage.
That might also be the case.
Yeah, I think we could definitely avoid it in this prediction. I think it's also used in the models itself, which are kind of stored as pickle files, I believe. So it might be a little more complex to get rid of it there, but it's not as like a strict necessity.
Yeah. It might be worth mentioning, although it probably won't change the dependency, but Karen is in the process of refactoring that code so that there's all the disk prediction stuff is in a standalone Python module that we can then consume. So that code's going to move out of the manager proper, but it'll still depend on NumPy, so won't necessarily change for us. Okay, well, it seems like the next step is to try it. Somebody needs to get motivated sometime this summer, I think.
Yep, sounds good.
We can talk about the last item.
Yeah, Ernesto, about the manager caching.
Yeah, well, Perry's here, so Perry, if you want to go with that.
Okay, so, well, I've answered to Sage on the APR, but he suggested adding the validation to the Usd map by this epoch, and maybe I need some info about how the rate of how this Usd map changes. So if it changes a lot, this invalidation strategy might not be that good. So yeah, I don't have that much info about the Usd maps in production. So.
It varies widely. I think most of the time in production, the map isn't going to roll over very often, but the cluster is like actively recovering, and it could roll over as quickly as every 2 seconds, but it is usually much less than that.
Yeah, then probably.
I think we're talking about a TTL of like 10 seconds, so I think it's not that far off, even in the worst case.
Yeah, And also I had a problem calculating the size of the Usd map, since it's an pi object. And the only thing that I've tried is an approximation, but I'm not sure if there is a better option to do this, to be honest. Ernesto suggested using check the interpreter size. But yeah, another thing.
I guess I have a question about, are we talking about dumping, is this like the JSON? Not JSON, it's not JSON, but it's like it's a series of dicts and arrays and whatever that it returns. Okay. I guess if we move away, I mean, I'm attracted to the idea of just holding on to the last object that we had indefinitely and reusing it if the epoch hasn't changed, because there's only one of every type of thing. So like the memory that we would consume would be bounded. We could even discard if, like, on the manager side, we see that the epoch updated, we could throw out the cache copy since we throw it out again later anyway. So it would be a short usage of memory. I don't think that doesn't seem like the memory usage would be that significant. And because then you don't have to worry about correctness on the side of the manager modules. They don't have to concern themselves with the idea that they might get something that isn't out of date or that isn't all the way up to date. Which, in like the case of like the balancer module, I could imagine being problematic. And like the PG autoscaler would possibly get confused if it had stale information. It seems like the downside, the main problem with that is that you can't tell if one of the manager modules went and like modified the object, and then you return the root pi object again to some other caller and they see the modified data. It sticks around. But I was thinking that we could introduce have a debug option that will basically regenerate every call. It'll regenerate the object, but in the debug mode, it'll compare it to the cached version.
Well, I don't think I thought the balancer didn't actually modify it. It sends the commands to the manager, and then we wait for like the updated maps to come in.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure which callers are modifying these objects, and ideally they wouldn't. But I think they choose that there wouldn't be a way to like tell if they did by accident, like if they actually called a pop or like did an array or assignment or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
a manager could inadvertently modify one, and it would just that change would persist, and other modules would see that persisted change, and it could just cause weird bugs.
Yeah, the issue here is that what we discovered is that the deep copy, Python deep copy, is not efficient. So it's even faster to serialize and deserialize from JSON, C pickle, right?
From pickle.
Quality optimal. Yeah. So it's surprising. I guess that it's because the Python thing it's also copying the methods and everything, not only the data itself. So that's why it's less efficient than serializing Python or.
That's pretty crazy. That's that slow.
Yeah. So we were also exploring using immutables. The other thing is that Python is just the opposite. It's a language supporting immutables. So Pere was trying that, and we were explaining there is an immutable class. Basically, it's a really simple thing to just override the setters in the basic shed objects. So you need to go through all the objects basically, and that more or less ends up in the same thing as doing a deep copy, right? So then we explore the copy on write thing. So you just copy the thing when there is an actual modification, and it's not an easy thing. The alternative is just to basically create an immutable by overriding the set attribute methods, and then make discovered. Let the modules crash as they try to modify that, and that way we'll quickly identify which modules are trying to modify some structure.
Yeah, maybe that would be the easiest thing.
Yeah, that seems like a good way to go.
Yeah. Because if we enforce that rule, then it seems like it's a straightforward problem to solve. We can just return the same object multiple times. Do you have like a sense of which calls are the ones that are most inefficient? Like, is it really the Usd map, or are there? I would guess things like PG dump and so on.
Yeah.
Those are probably the expensive ones, right?
I think historically, it's been the Usd map. I think that there's been a lot of issues there, right? And also when the network stats were added, there were some issues with that one too. There's a long list of trackers. I just collect a few ones. Yeah. But I guess those probably will be the hardest ones, the Usd map and PG map.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those
Apart from the time taken for PyFormatter to generate the Python object, there might be to be some contention in the finisher thread when that happens. So things like that. That was that the last tracker that you paste there basically includes a description of the queue length of the finisher under some large cluster.
Oh wow. Sure. Yeah, this is Notifile. We need to fix Notifile anyway, right?
Yeah.
The whole Notifile. Yeah.
There's only a few modules that use it, so I think the progress and insights module are the ones to fix there, or already fixing those. I think the rest are doing more time-based updates already, or using maps that are very small, like the health map or something.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, I guess the other thing we fixed there was kind of trying to pinpoint and only extract the actual data that a module needs from these maps. So it doesn't need to serialize like all the network ping times and everything from all the OSDs when it just wants like up and down status.
Yep. It's really easy to add targeted get calls on the in the C++ manager code. Instead of dumping the whole map, just dump just the thing you need. So if you can narrow down like either like specific things that you're always pulling out of the whole Usd map or subsets, then those are pretty quick to implement in C++.
Yeah, I think we did something similar earlier for at least the network ping time stuff and the balancer and the progress module. There was a whole cleanup we did for the stuff that we were dumping. Only dump the stuff that we need. But maybe there are other places as well. Ernesto, what are the recent bottlenecks that you're seeing? Any particular modules that are being a problem right now? Earlier, I know the progress and the network stuff was the problem.
Yeah, I think the Prometheus one has struggled a bit with that, with getting all the perf counters in time. So, well, perf counters and everything that is gathered, because I think it's right now it's taking info from multiple sources. So probably it will benefit from this approach.
I wonder why can't we just back the Python object with a C++ object as we do with the Usd map and crash map also? As long as we don't mutate them, otherwise we need to offer some mutators to this C++ object.
You mean for the PG map?
For Usd map and for PG, for crash map, we can apply the same technology to PG map, because they're also backed by the C++ object named PG map, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So we don't need to copy them, performing a deep copy, and serialize and deserialize so they can be consumed by Python code. Even if we want to mutate them, we could also offer mutator as a C++.
Yeah, I don't think we want to mutate it either.
Yeah.
That's a good point, Kifu. I guess that one of them I'm not clear about is maybe the dashboard's use of these structures.
I think the problem is what's the surface of the public interface we need to tackle. If it's very large, we probably should leverage the existing Pi formatter because that's what we already have using the formatter infrastructure. But if the surface is very small, we could just leverage the Python object, C++ object, and expose minimal interface exposed to the Python code, and wrap it around with a Python object.
Yeah, so if you are suggesting then exposing directly the binary data?
Kind of. It's not exposing the binary data, it's backed by the binary data in C++, but the interface is exposed as a Python interface.
I mean, I think it's just a question of how much effort we want to invest in like building out the Python interface around complicated data structure like the Usd map. Because you have
we already have a Pi Usd map.
I know, but you want to look at like one property on one OSD within that map. So you have to define functions and you have to have a wrapper around the OSD sub-object and then whatever. It's just, I think that's why
an IDL like this for generating the interface automatically.
That's why the JSON dump is convenient.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I think regardless of whether we go down that road or not, like still having this basic capability to like hold on to the big JSON dump that we generate and reuse it is going to be useful.
How about exposing a JSON dump for the object which is interested by Python code? Like pinpoint. If we, for example, if the Python code is interested in a certain feature, a certain property of a crush map, we could just expose an interface like dump, and that very method will call into, or will use Python formatter to dump that very structure, but only that on demand.
That's kind of what I was suggesting with, I think at least if I'm understanding you properly, that's what I was suggesting with extending get to include whatever more narrow field. Instead of dumping the entire OSD map, if you just need to know like the upfront for every OSD, then have a command that just dumps that. But
the problem of the get extending the get method is that the Python code cannot dump a given OSD map, a property of a given OSD map. What if it have multiple OSD map?
Well, it kind of can. I mean, you're just passing a string, and so a bunch of those like take an epic number as an argument. Like you say OSD map space and then an epic number. I mean, it's a little bit wonky, but it's not that hard to wire up additional things. I think. I mean, I would maybe look at it on a case-by-case basis. Like if you identify the thing that you keep getting that's nested within the deep structure, then like we can look at about how the best way to get that out is. I think you might be right that having these Pi objects that are backed by C++ structure might make sense in some cases, but it's just a lot of effort to set it up.
The interesting properties.
Can we make those Pi formatter things backed by C objects generic in a way that we don't need to care about the structure?
What do you mean by generic?
Another angle would be to try to kind of do a bit of a profile to see what kinds of fields and areas we're accessing that are kind of the bottlenecks.
Yeah.
Imagine that there's a generic way to kind of generate the accessors. But if we could understand like which fields are being accessed all the time, could target those for optimization.
We could probably run the Python module with C profile or something, and to try to find out the bottleneck and improve that part only. Instead of creating some generic way to tackle this problem.
In one of the tracker issues that Vanessa shared, we actually do have a call graph. That one is hanging in 100% in PGMap dump and 50% in pydict_new. So it's not that the JSON generation is expensive. It's that the Python object creation based on that JSON is expensive.
But I think we don't really, in most cases, we don't really interested in the whole Python object, but we choose to dump it all, no matter what part we are interested. So I think we need to look into the Python code, which exactly part we are interested in, and we need to look at it and to probably send it over to Prometheus.
Like if we're counting OSDs, then don't dump the whole map and then count the yeah. Exactly. Okay. Well, do we have path forward? Seems like it's two things. It's try out this idea of holding on to the reference and then overriding the gets and puts, not, I guess the puts, whatever, the setters. We can identify the offending modules, and then separately also just like doing an audit of these callers and see what optimizations make sense.
Yeah, maybe it's worth it, to explore this idea of instead of using the Py formatter, using the regular JSON formatter and importing that directly with the JSON decoder in Python side. We are passing a byte. It's counterintuitive, but it seems like it's more performant with passing the Python object itself. So,
good point. It might be simpler to maintain that too.
Yeah. Yeah, the Py formatter is a little bit fraught in the C++ code because you have to be really careful about the GIL. So if we could not do that, then that might also simplify the manager code. But I would be interested in seeing a confirmation that that's really the case, that it's faster.
Yeah, well, in that PR from Pere, you see that they took some measures. So at least the copying time for shallow copy, pickle, JSON, and copy. So the optimal one is pickle, which is a binary format. I'm not sure how feasible is that from the C++ side, because I think pickle is it's internal to Python, so it's not standard. But maybe there is some code that we can use to realize that.
Yeah. All right.
Well, yeah, it seems like we've got a number of things to investigate there, and you've purchased that we know what will be useful. Anything else we wanted to talk about today? All right. And thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
See you next month at CDM. And next week for the Ceph talks.
Yeah. See ya. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah.